In ministry, change is inevitable. You know that. I know that. It doesn't matter what area of ministry you're in, you know that there is change coming. Either you're coming out of a change, you're going into a change, or you're in the middle of change. But the question is when is the best time to make a change, especially a monumental one or a large one? When you're messing with culture, you're messing with your ministry style, or you're changing up how you're approaching evangelism. How do you know when the right time to make those changes are? Well, we've been talking about the church life cycle in the last few episodes. And what I want to do is I want to show you how the church life cycle can show you exactly where you can make change and the best time to do it and how to do it in the best way. And so let's get started.
So the big question is this: how do pastors like us, who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of Ministry Hackers Podcast. I hope you're doing wonderful wherever you are and whatever it is you are doing. Our goal here at Ministry Hackers is to help you as a pastor and ministry leader to live your dream life, where you get to pastor a growing church, pastor a growing ministry, and at the same time, spend time with your family, your friends, do the things you love, have hobbies. We're coming up in the holiday season, and this is a time where you need margin. You need margin in your time, margin in your money, and what we want to do is want to show you exactly how to get there. And so I want to invite you, go to brandonpartycooper.com/more time, more money, and right there you'll find a step-by-step guide on how you can do that, how you can go from being overwhelmed, stressed out, being anxious, feeling like the whole world is on your shoulders in ministry, go from that to having a growing ministry, a growing church, and at the same time having the margin that you need in your time and your finances to spend the time with your family and friends, to do the things you love to do, to make the dream life possible. So again, go to brandonpartycooper.com/more time, more money. It's free. It's a step-by-step guide. Download it, check it out, and start living that step-by-step guide out, and you'll see how you can go from where you are today to the dream life you've always wanted. And so, again, go to brandonpartycooper.com/more time, more money, and get your free guide today. All right, so we've been talking about the church life cycle. Been walking through the various stages and what those stages mean. Now, all of that's great. It's great to know where you are. It's great to know what phase you're in, and even from a leadership standpoint, it's great to know what that phase means and how to navigate it. But the bigger question, and I think why so many of us kind of struggle navigating the life cycle, is because we're always faced with change. What change do we make? What change do we not make? What risk should we take on this change and that change? How many people are we willing to upset over this change? And how many people are we just going to appease by not making that change? Change is a part of ministry. And it's something that we have to be good at navigating because it's inevitable. If we don't change, if we don't introduce change, if we don't navigate, honestly, as pastors and ministry leaders, if we're not the ones initiating change, then we're going to quickly find ourselves going through that life cycle and ending up in that aristocracy phase and on to death. Change has to happen. But where do we make that change? When is the change most effective and the least full of friction? And what I'm going to do, I want to show you there are two ideal places to make change that alleviates friction and increases impact. Now, when we're talking change for this, we're not talking small changes. We're not talking minor tweaks and things like that to our ministries or our structures or how we do things in the office. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking major changes. Shifts in mindset, shifts in philosophy, a shift in how you do your mission or your vision. These are major changes. Maybe you're building a building. You're adding on to your current building. Maybe you're launching a new ministry. Maybe you're shifting from, an example would be when we shifted from Sunday school to small groups. That was a major change. That's the kind of change that I'm talking about. And there are two specific places in the church life cycle that you need to make those changes. Now, you can make changes at any point. And especially if there is a change needed, make it when it's needed. But if there are major shifts and major changes that are happening, then there are two strategic points you can make those. And the first one
is right before prime, right in between adolescence and right before prime, right before you you start to feel like the prime is coming. Everything starts to start working really, really well. You've kind of identified yourself. You figured out who you are as a church or a ministry, and you just kind of know, man, it just feels like things are starting to click. That's the time to start making changes. The other time to make changes is on the backside of prime. So before you kind of shift into that maturity stage, you start to feel like things are starting to wane. Maybe the energy is starting to drop. You're feeling like things just don't feel quite as on point as they used to. That's an indication you're starting to move into maturity, and that's a good point to make change. And I'll explain why. Both of these have everybody, for the most part, on the same page. As you're going into prime, everybody's excited, everybody's focused, everybody's moving forward. On the backside of prime, right before you hit that maturity stage, there is a point right before everybody starts to scatter. Your board, your volunteers, your leaders, even your pastoral staff start to have their own vision, their own mission. They start to kind of scatter in different directions. And the deeper into maturity you go, the more that happens. The more you slip into that maturity stage where, everything is you're starting to settle into the way things work and everything's operating really well from prime. And so, everybody starts to settle. You want to hurry up and make changes right before they hit that settling point. Because once they settle, once your congregation, your staff, once your board, they kind of settle into riding the wave of prime, then getting them to move again is going to be hard. Unfortunately, most of us looking at change right now are in the maturity stage or even in the aristocracy stage. And so change needs to happen regardless of where. But if you're in the prime stage or near the adolescent stage, then be aware that there is a point of change coming that you need to be prepared for. Now, these are very different change points, though. In the first stage, so in the first point of change between aristocracy and prime, what you really need is you need leadership. You need, in this stage, everybody is moving forward. In fact, when you introduce change, when you say, hey, I think we're going to shift direction like this, most people are going to say, why? Why would we do that? The old adage of don't fix it if it ain't broken. That's where this comes in. People are going to look around there and be like, everything's going well. Why would you mess with that? As a pastor and as a ministry leader, as the one kind of leading the crew, you need to be the one to have the foresight to look forward and say, these are the changes that need to happen. Now, we're not saying do change just for change's sake. But what I am saying is you're going to know, as the pastor, as a ministry leader, you're going to know something is not quite where it needs to be. Something is not as good as it could be. Something is not quite on point as we would like it to be. Now, is there a good chance it will be on point in the future? Possibly. But if you see a different way forward in that adolescent stage, as you're entering that prime stage, as you're seeing that, then what you do is you introduce change. Now, on the back end of prime, instead of leadership, you need management. And the reason is because you've come through prime. Everything is going great. Everything's going wonderful. But people are starting to settle in. They're starting to ride that wave. And what you need to do is get them to not settle. And so instead of charging forward in a leadership, as a leader, charging forward as you would at the adolescent prime change point, in this one, you have to kind of massage some of those naysayers. You have to massage some of the egos. You have to massage some of the settling in that's already happening. And that's more management. That's more stepping in and gently guiding, gently pointing in a different direction, shifting mindsets and shifting ideas. It takes longer. It's slower and is more volatile. You're going to have more resistance at the second change point before maturity, in between prime and maturity, than you will at the first change point. And so leadership is accepted on the first change point. Management is needed on the second. And if you get those two mixed up, if you try to charge forward on that second change point and you try to be a strong leader and come in and say, okay, guys, this is the direction we need to go, raise the flags, let's do it. What's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of resistance. You're going to have a lot of questions. And people they're already settling in. So what they're going to do is they're going to dig their feet in the ground and they say,
nope, we're not doing that. We're going to stay right where we are. And that's where the management comes in, is now you have to start making tougher decisions. You have to make decisions. Are we going to make the change and risk losing X amount of people, X percentage of people? Are we willing to do that? Now, here's what's on the line. If you are saying this is a change that needs to happen and you have to risk that, you have the choice to not risk it and not make the change and continue the life cycle into maturity, on into aristocracy, and on into death. If you're willing to make that change and step up as a manager and say, okay, I recognize that we're going to lose people. I recognize that people aren't going to be happy about it. I recognize that this is not going to be the popular decision, not because it's not the right decision, but because people are going to be resistant because they're already settling in. If you're able to recognize that and you're willing to take that risk, then you make the change at that point. And here's what happens at both points. You start a whole new life cycle. When you make that change, whether it's at the first change point or the second change point, when you make that change, what happens is you create a whole new life cycle. And so if you think of a bell curve, like we've talked about, at that point of change, whether it's before prime or after prime, at that point of change, a new life cycle begins. Now, the difference is that when you're coming up on that adolescent stage and right before prime and you create that new life cycle, you just go into the life cycle. On the back end, though, after prime, before maturity, if you make change there, then you have to go through a period of chaos to get to that new life cycle point and start it over. And so on the front end, if you make your change before prime, when people are saying, oh, that doesn't make any sense, why would we do that? Everything's going so well. We're moving forward. God is doing great things and everything is working well and new people are starting to come. And why would you change now? There's questions, sure. But the momentum and energy is already moving that direction. And so it's just a slight shift from people to go from going this direction to slightly going that direction. And they're a lot more accepting because they're not settled in. They're excited about what God's going to do. They're excited about the mission of the church. They're excited about what's possible. And so they may be like, I don't understand why we're doing this, but we're with you, Pastor. We're going to do it. On the back end, when you make it there, you have to know you're going to go through a period of chaos because people are going to say, I don't want to do that. Everything has gone well. We've been riding this wave. Everything's been going great. New people being saved. And notice the shift in terminology. On the front end, it's a lot more forward thinking. On the back end, it's a lot backward thinking. It's God has been doing all these great things. God, remember when God did this, and remember when this event went well. Remember when all these people came. Remember. Why would we change that? It's a lot more resistant and a lot more angry. Usually people are a lot more dug in because they're started to settle. They're settling in. They're ready to ride it out. And that's where we start slipping into maturity and then aristocracy, which is where we don't want to be. And so when we're making a change point at that second point, there's a period of chaos before we can start that new life cycle. If we're willing to kind of step out on an island and say, hey guys, I know that everything is going great and we're moving in this direction, but I want us to move in this direction. I believe God is moving us this way. You're going to stand on an island for a little bit, but people are going to be a lot easier, a lot quicker, and a lot more excited to jump on board with this change on the front end before you go into prime. Partially because they haven't seen all the greatness that prime brings. They haven't, you haven't walked through a prime season where it's like, oh my goodness, we're not doing anything and everything's just working. You haven't gone through that. You're still at a point where there's work to be done. People are still putting their hand to the plow. People are still going out and reaching people. They're still inviting their friends, inviting their family members. They're still inviting their coworkers. People are excited to volunteer. They're still on board with the mission. They're still in that adolescent early prime stage. They haven't gone through the meat of the prime stage. When you go through the apex of the prime stage and you come on that other side,
That's where people are settling in. They're like, that was awesome. We didn't do anything and God just moved and everything worked and people came and got saved and we just kind of stood by and watched. Well, that's what you're fighting when you get to the second stage, because now they have to work again. Now they have to dive in. Now they have to get their hands dirty again because you're making change, and that's hard. And sometimes people aren't up for that. And so as a pastor, as a ministry leader, as the one who's at the helm that is guiding your ministry or your church congregation, whichever it is, you're the one that needs to make the decision, where are we going to change? Are we going to choose to change before we have to and deal with kind of the question marks and the why are we doing this? Or are you going to change when you need to? And you have the friction and you have the settling in and you have the movement of people and getting them up and going. Which is it going to be? Because change is inevitable. You're going to change one way or the other. And if you slip past maturity, if somehow you just ride out that wave of prime and you go right through maturity on into aristocracy, at that point, change is nearly impossible. It's not impossible, but it's nearly impossible. Because when you reach the aristocracy stage, your congregation is not open to doing things differently. They're open to doing the things the way they've always done it because it's comfortable and it's easy for them. You have to make change at some point. It's a question of where are you going to choose to make that change? And that's entirely up to you. You can ride out that prime stage and you can enjoy it and come on the backside and manage your way through into a new life cycle and make the change. That's fine. You just have to know what your strengths are. If you're a strong leader and not a great manager, then make change early. Make change early and make it as often as necessary to keep those life cycles starting over. If you're not a great leader, but you're a really good manager, then maybe you wait until after prime and you try to make that change. But just know, every time you make a change on the backside of prime, you're going to go through a period of chaos. That could be months. It could be years. It depends on how entrenched your people are. It depends on how settled in they are. You may have some staff turnover because of it. You will definitely have volunteer turnover and congregational turnover. Those two things are inevitable. If you can keep your staff together, that's a huge win. It just depends on how deep into maturity you get before you start making changes. The deeper into maturity you get, the harder it becomes, the more turnover you will experience. It's really a question of which one do you want. Me personally, I prefer before prime. I get it. You don't really ever go through this apex prime period. But quite honestly, from my standpoint, I would much rather lead people who are already moving together in one direction. I would much rather lead them in a slightly different direction than try to get people who are settled back up and moving. To me, that seems way harder. And so it's up to you. The life cycle happens. There is no question about it. It's no question how it happens. It happens. There's a point where our churches and our ministries come alive. They go through a growth period and they go through a death period and they shut their doors eventually. And maybe not in our lifetime. You may see a church and a ministry last your entire lifetime and never go entirely through the life cycle. But for you, as the pastor and ministry leader, what do you want to see for your church? What do you want to see for your ministry? Do you want to see those energetic, exciting life cycles start over and over and over again and see great things happen through your ministries and your community reached and lives being touched and changed and people coming into a relationship with Jesus? If that's what you're wanting, then I would say figure out how to make those changes on the early part. And at the very least, make it on the backside of that prime stage before you slip into maturity. Either way, change has to happen. It's just a question of where. And you as a pastor, you know what your strengths are, you know what your giftings are, and you can do this. You can lead through change. You have been doing that. If you have been pastoring for any amount of time, you have been leading through change. So you can do this. It's just a question of how you want to do it. Do you want to do it on the front end or the back end of prime? Either one, it's making change, and you can do it. So I hope this is helpful. I hope seeing the life cycle play out and understanding all the stages and the steps, I hope it's helped you diagnose where you are, where your church is, what changes you're looking at, and how you can move forward and keep your church vibrant and alive and ready to go. All right. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next episode.